In this video, I'm going to cover one of the most common questions that I get asked, which is how much commission should you pay your barbers or your hairstylists for that matter? I haven't found a single resource on the internet that has given what I think is the actual answer to this question, which is how much commission should you pay your barbers or your hairstylists? And I think that this video is going to be intended a lot more for barbershop owners, but I'm also going to give some tips for barbers and for hairstylists because if you are looking for a job to go work somewhere, I think it's really important that you understand what you're getting into when it comes to how you're paid. So in this video, I'm going to cover how to find the answer because I believe in teaching people how to fish as opposed to just giving you a number, because this is one of the things that I did not know when I got into my business, and it almost put me out of business. So that's why I'm making this video, because it is one of the most common questions that I get asked, but it's also something that I wish I knew when I was getting started, which is the whole point of my channel. So if you don't know who I am, my name's Alex. I own House Chase Barbershop, multi-million-dollar barbershop, and these are the things that I wish I knew when I was getting started. So if you find this stuff valuable, keep watching, subscribe, all that stuff. So let's get into how to actually figure out how much commission to pay your barbers. So I'm going to share my screen now. We're going to go over our agenda for this call, everything that we're going to cover, and then I'll actually show you how to figure out the answer. So let's get into it. So the first thing that we need to cover, this is our agenda for this video. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible, but this is a rather complicated and probably the one video that up to this point at least is going to get me the most hate, because most people aren't going to watch this video to the end and they're not going to understand the things that I'm about to say. And so for those of you that watch to the end, you're going to get the most value, I think. And the first time I found the answer to this question, I actually didn't understand it the first time I heard it. So this is why I put it later on in our agenda, but you may need to watch this video several times, save it, and maybe come back to it in a few years, because I did not understand the first time I heard it what the person was truly saying. And so I'm going to try to walk you through the process to find the answer of how much commission to pay your barbers. But first we need to start, because if you're new to the industry, or even if you're not new, we'll just do a quick recap on what are the different pay structures out there. Because it's important to know that there's not just one way that you can pay your barbers. So for this video, we're going to be focusing on commission and hourly model. Booth rent is going to be excluded from this video because we are talking about barbershop owners that pay their people a percentage or based on the work that they do. Okay? So when it comes to pay structures, what I'm going to talk about in this video are commission and hourly, but there's also hybrid models. Like my barbershop is a hybrid model. My barbers get an hourly pay, but they can also earn commission based on their performance. We call it performance pay, but it's basically either hourly or commission, whichever is higher. Some barbershops do pure commission. You only get paid if you're doing a haircut. Some barbershops do only hourly. We've done all three, where some do both, right? So we've done all three, and we currently do the hybrid model where barbers get paid hourly. So if they're having a slow day, if they have a no-show, they have that hourly base to protect them. But if their performance is great and their sales are high enough, then their pay basically switches to commission, and we call that performance pay. I don't think that there is a right or wrong way. The point of this video is to figure out what is that line? Like what is the highest you can go so that your business can be profitable? And I think that the answer might surprise you, but I think that the most important thing that I think you get from this video is to think about how to ask this question, and more importantly, how to find the answer maybe a little bit differently than you might think. Because as I became more seasoned in business and I started to learn how businesses much larger than mine think about questions like this, it's actually not as simple as how much commission do you pay somebody. Because the way big businesses think about payroll is, what is their payroll cost relative to the revenue of the business? They don't think about how much commission do they pay their barbers and then figure. No, they start with, this is what we want to keep our payroll costs within, and then they work backwards from there to figure out how much they can pay their people. And this is the reason why I like performance pay, and why I set up my barbershop to be a performance pay model, because that's what I did. I said, this is the range that I want our payroll costs to be in, and then you work backwards from there to figure out how can you pay your people as much as possible, but still keep it within a healthy range of the business. So that's the first thing that you need to know to start to answer this question of how much commission or hourly or whatever you want to pay your barbers. It depends on where you want your payroll costs to be. And I actually made a calculator, which I'll go through with you guys in a second, on how you can actually figure out how much commission you can pay somebody. But the next thing you need to know, the first decision that you need to make as a barbershop owner or as a barber is, are you going to have employees or are you going to have independent contractors? Because that's going to determine the entire rest of this process. Because if you have an independent contractor, so somebody who gets a 1099 at the end of the year so that they can file their taxes, as a barbershop owner, you can afford to pay more because you don't have to set aside money for payroll taxes. You don't have to worry about the cost of benefits, etc., right? Where if you want to have employees, so people that get a W-2 at the end of the year, and you're withholding taxes from their paycheck, and maybe you offer benefits in the future if you can afford it, then that's going to mean you can't pay as much as the people down the street maybe that are doing the 1099 contractor thing. So they're just two different ways of paying your barbers, and both of them are completely legal. Where I think barbershop owners are crossing the line here is when people treat their barbers like employees, but then pay them like contractors, because they're basically trying to get the benefit of having employees without paying payroll tax or anything else like workers' comp or the things that basically you have to do if you have employees. So that's the thing that the first decision I think you need to make is, if you're trying to open a barbershop, or if you're trying to decide how much to pay your barbers, the first thing you need to figure out is, well, am I going to have employees or am I going to have contractors? Because if you have contractors, 1099 independent contractors, you can afford to pay at least 15% more, because that's just what the payroll tax is, than somebody who has a W-2 employees. But you are not going to be able to do benefits and paid time off and, things like that, right? So there's no right or wrong way. It's just when you try to treat if you try to have contractors and then treat them like employees, that's what you can get. that's what can get you in trouble. So that's the first decision you need to make. And the next thing you need to know is there is no right or wrong way, I think, unless you are misclassifying your barbers. There really is no right or wrong way. So what I mean by that is how much you decide to pay your barbers is completely up to you and your goals, right? If you are a single location barbershop where you cut hair as the owner, right? And you have no intention of growing beyond one location, and you are just happy cutting hair and maybe making a little bit extra on the side, then you can afford to pay more than somebody like me who I don't cut hair full time. I don't want to cut hair, period. And my goal is to grow. So my business has to be more profitable than yours if you're just a single location, this is my career, I'm going to do this till I die type of barbershop owner, right? Because my goal is I want to still get a paycheck, but I don't want to cut hair. So I can't pay my barbers as much as you because I have to cover my salary and I have to cover the other expenses of having a business. Now I do other things that grow the business that don't involve cutting hair, but I still need to get paid. So that money has to come from somewhere, right? So, but if there's no right or wrong way, right? If your goal is to grow, right? And I think that a true business is one that can run without you. Now, most of you guys watching this video are probably not going to be in that scenario yet, hopefully. And maybe you are, where your business can truly operate without you. And you're not cutting hair and the business is fine, right? But the goal, I think, if that's the goal, so one day you don't have to cut hair anymore, then you can't pay your people as much as the guy that is his goal. Like he just wants to cut hair forever and make a little bit extra money on the side, right? So you can't. So that's the next decision you have to make is, what is your goal? Do you want to grow? Do you want to cut hair forever? If you do, nothing wrong with that. You can pay your people more, right? But if your goal, if you don't want to cut hair and you want to be able to draw a salary still, and you want to be able to expand and do more locations and hire people that don't cut hair, like support staff, like accountants and receptionists and managers and trainers, right? And that's just to name a few. Those people aren't directly going to be generating revenue, so your barbers have to be producing enough profit to pay for those people's salaries, right? So that's another thing is like, my goal is to grow, right? So I look at the biggest players in the business, the ones that have hundreds, if not thousands of barbershops. And I look at what they do because I want to be that big, right? And one thing I've noticed in virtually every large chain, and by large, I mean 100 locations plus, is that all of them classify their people as employees, and none of them pay their people more than about 40% commission max, right? And that's, I think, because they're thinking about this, and they probably made those mistakes. Some of these companies, like Sport Clips, for example, they're like 30 years old. Like they've been doing this for almost as long as I've been alive, maybe longer, right? So my goal is to grow and to be like as big as them one day. So if they're not doing that, I am not smarter than Sport Clips. You, as a barber, are probably not smarter than Sport Clips and Great Clips and all these other chains that have 1,000+ locations. So to think that you're smarter and better at math than them, I think is a red flag, right? Because if they're not paying their people 50, 60, 70% commission, and your goal is to get as big as them, then you probably shouldn't either, right? Now, if you don't want to grow that big, then maybe you could give your people more. Nothing wrong with that. They'll appreciate it. But my goal is to grow, right? So we can't afford to pay. And this is the common mistake I think that a lot of barbershop owners make, including me, is that you're comparing yourself to others, right? So this goes back to here maybe, because if you're comparing yourself to the barbershops around you, first of all, most 9 out of every 10 barbershops that I see that pay their people on a commission basis are probably operating illegally, meaning they're treating their people like employees, telling them when to clock in, what to wear, how much to charge. You have to use my booking system. You have to do a haircut in this amount of time. They're treating their people like employees, but then they're giving them a 1099 at the end of the year, right? So if you have employees like W-2, then don't compare yourself to them, right? Because they have a different cost structure than you would, you know? Now, if you're going to classify your people as a 1099, then maybe you can compare yourself to them. But the ultimate answer to answering this question of how much commission to pay your barbers is do the math. You have to do the math. You don't try to resist the urge of just copying the guy down the street who's probably broke and struggling. Why would you want to copy somebody who's broke and struggling? They're probably trying to copy you too, right? So don't copy broke barbershop owners. Do the math to figure out what makes sense for your business. That is the best answer to any question you could possibly ask me or any other barbershop owner. When you're trying to figure out how much to pay your barbers, do the math, right? And I'm going to walk you through how to do the math. But don't stop copying people, because I think that's how we got to this point, where barbershop owners, their barbers are making more than the owners, the people that took all of the risk, right? That should not be that way. You as a barbershop owner it's okay. You as the barbershop owner are allowed to make a profit. You're allowed to make good money from your business. You took all of the risk. You need to see a return on your investment, because otherwise you could probably make the same amount of money as you're making now without any of the risk by just working for somebody else or having your own suite. But you took the risk to go out on your own, to sign a lease, to invest tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, to open a barbershop just to make less than your barbers. It shouldn't be that way, in my opinion. You're allowed to make a profit, right? So in this video, I hope you can figure out the math to figure out how to pay your people, right? So stop comparing yourself to others, right? Unless you want to be like them. So if you want to be a broke barbershop owner, then copy other broke barbershop owners. Don't do the math and just guess, right? And then you'll be just like them, right? But this is for people that don't want to be broke barbershop owners, right? And again, you may need to watch this video several times, but hopefully you get it on the first try, right? So now let's actually talk about how to figure out how much to pay your barbers. So I made this spreadsheet. I love spreadsheets, and you can, if you don't know how to use a spreadsheet, you can always just hand do the math, use a calculator, right? I'll probably share this spreadsheet with my paid community. I have a paid community called the Barbershop Owner Mastermind. So this is my free one. If you guys aren't ready for the paid one, I have a free group called the Barber Mastermind Free. The link to that is in my bio wherever you're watching this. But I also have a paid community where I'm going to share this spreadsheet that I'm, about to go walk through with you guys. And I'll probably put it somewhere here. These are all the courses we have in this group. I'll probably create a new course or put it in the resources tab. But anyways, this is where you're going to be able to find this calculator, if you're part of my paid community, right? So let's say you have a location, right? Well, let me actually before I start using this spreadsheet, I'm going to actually walk through a little bit what some of this stuff means. So this is very similar to what you might see referred to as a profit and loss, a P&L, right? So you got your revenue at the top, and then you got your expenses at the bottom, and then it tells you how much was left over. Now, so these are example numbers, but they're going to be pretty close to my actual numbers, right? So here's some variables here over in the right-hand side. So how much commission, there's only a few. How much commission do you want to pay your barbers? You can put whatever number you want here. And then we're going to walk through how to actually figure it out. How much retail commission do you want to pay your barbers? How much did you spend on products? And then what's your credit card processing fee? So first, I think we'll start with the most common number that I hear thrown around, which is 50%. And then we'll leave it at 10% for retail commission. Now, if you have the access to this spreadsheet or you want to do it on your own, you can change any of these numbers. That's why they're called variables, right? So play with the numbers, and then you see if you like the number at the bottom, right? So that's what we're about to do now. And retail product cost, because you had to buy the product before you could sell it. So, there's a cost there. It's not just free money. And then credit card processing fee. So if you're accepting credit cards, we do, I just put 3% in here. Ours is a little bit lower than this, but if, that goes there, right? And you adjust these numbers to fit your reality, right? So I'm just going to put I put some example numbers in here already. So let's say your revenue, and then we're going off monthly, right? So your monthly revenue is $50K, right? And then that's from services. So in our barbershop, at least in my case, most of our revenue comes from services. It's usually somewhere between 95 to 90% of our revenue comes from services. So right now it's like 98 on this spreadsheet, but yeah. And then you put how much did you sell in retail. So these are the only two revenue numbers that you have to worry about right now. So service revenue goes at the top, retail goes here. And then this number, this payroll cost, comes from this number over here. So right off the bat, 50% of revenue from this 50,000 is gone to payroll, right? And then you got 10% coming from the retail, since we're paying our barbers 10% on all the retail they sell. So right now our payroll cost, so half of our revenue is gone now. So we're at 50.2%. Right, and then we're still going, right? So we keep going down, and then our retail product cost, that came from here. So if you spent, if you sold 1,000, it depends on your margin, right? But a lot of people will buy a product for like $10 and then sell it for 20. So, if you're 50% margin, then that's where that number came from, right? Credit card processing fee, that comes from here. So you don't have to touch any of these numbers. You just move it over here on the right-hand side. This is where actually you're going to start typing in the reality of your business. So as a barbershop owner, you're going to be getting a salary, right? So that needs to be separate. So one of the mistakes I see barbershop owners make, because I coach a few, right, is that they consider the profit of their business is their salary. Like, no, that's not the case, right? That's not the way these large businesses work either. The profit is what's left over after you get paid as a barbershop owner. If you're considering the profit is your salary, well, then you probably don't have any profit, right? So you need to put your pay as a barbershop owner here, right? And these are just like rough percentages, but you could use these as benchmarks too. I was told that you don't want your pay as an owner to exceed more than 10% of the business's revenue. Now you can go high. You can do whatever you want. It's your business, right? So that's the thing. I don't want this video to seem like I'm preaching, like it has to be this way. The point of this video is for me to walk you through the math, and then you come up with the answer for what makes sense for your business. But let's say that your pay is $5,000 a month, right? Then let's say you have some people helping you, like an accountant, whatever, coach. If you're paying for courses, consulting, that goes there, right? Let's say you're spending some money on advertising. I would never spend only $500, but Well, let's say you're getting aggressive, right? And because I like to think about things in terms of percentages. So if your pay is, if your revenue is 50 grand, and you're getting, like, if you're trying to be aggressive with your advertising, then you might spend up to, let's say, 10% of your revenue. So 10% of 50,000 would be 5,000. So it would actually be another zero here. So that is if you're getting really aggressive, right? And let's say you got some debt, you took out some loans to pay, you could change these numbers, by the way, if you have access to this calculator. If you don't, then just screenshot this and make your own spreadsheet. Don't do the math, right? And then you got some software, some subscriptions, whatever, your booking system. My software is expensive. So I roll all that in here. You got some maintenance expenses, right? So maybe it's not 200 every month, but if you average it out over the year, like it was 0, 0, 0, and then boom, you get hit with a $500 bill. So you just average it out over the month, right? Let's say you bought your team some lunch, you bought, you had a meeting with one of your barbers, you bought them lunch, you bought them coffee, whatever. All those expenses go here, right? And you're probably using supplies to provide, some of the services in your barbershop. So, those expenses go there. As a barbershop, we're not really using that much, in terms of supplies. As a salon, you're definitely going to be using a lot more. So the total cost of your expenses goes there, right? Rent, of course, is going to be a big one, right? So your rent, I think, should hopefully never exceed 10% of your revenue. It really depends, but our shops are really small. They're less than 1,000 square feet. So our rent is much less than 10% of our revenue. And then let's say you got some security system. Let's say you're setting aside money for taxes. You got your utilities, your internet, whatever. You spent some gas. You got some electricity, water, sewage. All that goes here. We didn't spend anything on travel. We got some 401k match. We got some payroll, whatever. So in this scenario right now, the way this spreadsheet currently sits is you have employees, right? So if you're giving somebody 50% of all the revenue they generate service-wise, and then you do the 10% retail commission, and then you have all these expenses are accurate, then you're actually going to lose money, right? So this is why, you need to be careful about how you work your way to this number. Now, so that's scenario one, right? Now, if you don't have employees, well, then you can get rid of this right here, these three right there. So all of this, you're still going to have insurance most likely for your, business. Hopefully you have insurance, but that would be much less. Like business insurance really isn't that much, right? So you can maybe make this. Let's copy this, put that over there for later, and we're going to delete all this, and then we're going to just put like $200 for insurance, right? So now, as you can see, by having independent contractors, we can actually pay people 50% commission, still have all these expenses, and then make a profit. Now, the profit margin is really small. It's less than 10%, but it's possible, right, to not lose money doing it this way. Now, I have employees, so this is why I cannot do this, right? Because if I go back, you see I start losing money, right? If I pay 50% commission and I start paying, or if I pay my barbers 50% commission, 50% of the revenue, right? And I have all these expenses on top, well then I lose money, and then I go out of business, right? So this is what I wish I knew, when I was first getting started. Now, if you don't want to have employees, well, then you can get rid of this, right? And then you'll make some money, right? And you can maybe even go higher. So let's see what it looks like when we take this away again, right? Well, let's go back, and we're going to take this. We're going to cut that, put that over there. We're going to put this back to 200. And let's say you want to pay your people more. You want to give them 60%. Okay, well, you can still, you're already losing money now. So you'd have to take something away from something else. So, all right, so now, and this is the challenge of the business owner, right? Because if you want to pay your people more, you can do that. It's your business. Do whatever you want. But the numbers don't lie. And one of the questions that I say, one of the things that I say to my managers all the time is just, where's the money going to come from? So you can absolutely pay your people 60% commission or more, right? You just can't do that and spend the same everywhere else. So now we're losing $230 a month. So now we can't sustain that, right? It's not a huge loss, but eventually it's going to lead to zero, right? Eventually we're going to run out of money in the bank account if we don't fix this. So we're just going to reduce our marketing budget now, right? So we can't spend as much now because we're paying our barbers more. So now we have to take away from somewhere else. And now we're back profitable again, but it's 1.5% profit. So this is the thing. So this is the challenge of being a barbershop owner, is weighing the two. And I think that the reason why barbers struggle with this, there's really two main reasons, I think. Is because there's so many people that didn't do this process that I'm walking through right now, and they're just guessed, right? It's the same reason. It's the same thing how it got us to our haircut prices. Everybody is just copying each other. Nobody's done the math. Everybody is just guessing, how much should I charge for a haircut? Very few people have actually sat down and done the math and like, oh, that's what I need to charge per haircut to run my business and make some money. It's the same thing with how much do you pay your barbers commission-wise. You got to do the math and see, this is how much is left over after I pay them. Can my business survive off that? If the answer is yes, and you're happy with what this number says at the bottom, then go for it, right? And if you're in that scenario where you just want to make a little bit extra money, right, and your intention is not to grow, then you might be okay with having a little less profit, right? Totally up to you. Like, it all depends on your goals, right? Now, I'm going to go back to what I did earlier, because I'm going to share with you basically, this is, like I mentioned, how I started. One of the first things you need to keep in mind is, if you look here, we need to lower this. Like, if our goal is to grow, and as a barbershop owner, like, my goal is, I don't want the business to be dependent on me cutting hair to be profitable. So the only way to do that, and by keeping all of our other expenses the same, like, we're losing money right now in this scenario, paying our barbers 50%. The only way to, there's a few things you can do, but the easiest thing you can do is you have to generate more profit, right? So you can either do that by selling more retail, so we can really push our barbers to push more retail. So let's say we do $4,000, right, in retail sales, and our profit margin is still 50%. So we got to do this. This is $2,000 now. So let's see what that changed. We kept our commission at 50%, right? So if we look at the bottom, like, we're still losing money. So that's not enough, right? So this is one of the biggest things that, the fastest ways you can fix any problems in your business, right? Because there's a lot of things that we can cut here, right? But if you look at it, out of all the things on this spreadsheet, which one is the biggest, right? Because you can spend a little bit less on marketing, and that'll help, right? You can spend, maybe try to renegotiate your rent, but you can maybe take a pay cut. I've done that, right? But this is still 50% of your revenue, right? So the only way to dig yourself out of this hole, and this is what I had to do, is to figure out how to lower this cost, right? So what that means is, I realized I couldn't pay my people 60%, 55%, or even 50% because I went through this process, right? So I realized, for my business, and this could change in the future, and I'm going to show you maybe a little ninja trick at the end to get the wheels turning about how you can do this. But at our shop, we try to keep our total payroll cost between 30 and 40% of revenue. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So let's say we change this number to 40, right? So we've lowered the payroll from 50% down to 40. And now all of a sudden, look at that. We've got some profit. So this is really just a math problem. It's kind of a complicated math problem, but it's a math problem that pretty much nobody is willing to do. And I can promise you that all the biggest barbershop chains that you've seen, all the biggest haircutting chains that you've seen, have done this math. And there's a reason why they are bigger than you, right? It's because they did this. They're not guessing, right? This is not something you should guess with. So I actually like to keep our total payroll cost at less than 40% of revenue, because by the time you add in all this other stuff, it's actually going to be closer to 50%. All right, that's just what they get paid. That's not counting their payroll, their insurance, whatever. Right, but that doesn't mean that some of my barbers get paid 40% commission. Some actually get significantly higher than that. Some get a lot less than that. It really depends. That's why I call it performance pay, right? My barbers are compensated based on their skill, their position. I take into account how long they've been there, etc. Right? So some people get paid way more than 40. So, and this is why this is the wrong question to be asking of how much you should pay a barber, because it's really, this is the answer that you need to find, which is, what does my payroll cost need to be relative to my revenue? Because some of my barbers get paid, as far as what they get paid, that equates to about 50, 60%, sometimes more, relative to the revenue they produced, right? Some of my barbers are closer to 30%, but the total, the average of the team, I try to keep it under 40. So hopefully that makes sense. There's not like a set number that I think that you have to pay everybody. Not everybody has to get paid the same, right? Some people produce more, then they get paid more. Some people produce less, then they get paid less. So that's how my performance pay structures work. The people that produce less make less. The people that produce more make more. Simple, right? And the average, the total of the team is what I pay attention to. I don't really care if somebody gets paid, 50, 60, 70% of what they made, as long as the total payroll percentage is under what my business needs it to be at. Now, let's go back to, so hopefully you guys found that part helpful. And then if you're a barber, let me go back to our agenda. So how does this help you if you're a barber? Because you're probably wondering, well, how does this help me as a barber? Well, you need to think about this. When you're looking and you're talking to barbershop owners, that you need to go back to this agenda, which is, what is the pay structure? And am I going to be an employee or a contractor? Because if you're an employee, you have to be okay with the fact that taxes are going to be taken out of your paycheck. But that also could mean that you have benefits like healthcare, dental, like this. These are what I offer in my barbershop. So my barbers get healthcare benefits, they get dental benefits, they get paid time off, they get a 401k with a company match so they can save for retirement. I pay for all of the supplies that we use. The only thing that they have to do is pay for or bring their own tools. That's it, right? I provide everything else. Whereas a contractor, you get a much bigger paycheck, right? Because there's nothing getting taken out, but you usually are going to be responsible for a lot of your own stuff, right? And maybe even responsible for getting your own clients, because I can tell you that if the barbershop owner is paying you, 50, 60, 70% commission, they're probably not going to have a lot of money left over to do, to spend money on marketing and things like that, right? Unless there's a special case, which I'm going to get to in a second. But it's very unlikely that you're going to find a barbershop owner that can pay you more than 50, 60, 70% commission and also provide all the things that we provide, having employees. So if you're a barber looking for a barbershop to work at, just keep that in mind. This is really the main thing you need to know. Am I going to be an employee? If so, then that means you might make a little bit less initially, right? But you might get it back at tax time if you get a tax refund or you just pay less taxes, right? Whereas a contractor, you're going to get a fat check, but you have to keep in mind, set aside money for taxes because the owner's not paying that stuff for you, right? So so when you're comparing different pay structures to different barbershops, you have to be okay with the fact that you have to compare apples to apples, right? So if that barbershop over there that you applied at, they're saying that their pay is 40% commission, but but you're an employee and you have benefits and you have paid time off. Are you okay with that? Or do you just want to maximize your pay? And if that's the case, then you go to a place where you get nothing, no benefits. You got to get your own clients, but you get to keep a bigger portion of what you make. Right? It's simply just a math problem, right? Now, the last thing I want to show you, because some of you guys might be a little demoralized and like, I don't know, I don't know if I can do that, because that's the main thing, is like, one of the hardest parts, I think, of becoming a barbershop owner is really becoming a business owner. And you have to, in order to grow as a business owner, you have to stop thinking like a barber, right? So you can't feel bad about paying. Then you just know that the average barber revenue, despite what is thrown around, or salary, despite what's thrown around on social media, is like less than 50K, right? It tests that, right? I have a video on my YouTube channel that goes over this, but you can go to salary.com, you can go to Indeed, and you can see that most barbers, a lot of them, despite what people are trying to sell you on social media, don't make more than 50K a year, right? Less than $1,000 a week. So if you're paying your people somewhere even in the neighborhood of that, then you've done your job, I think. And I think you should always create ways for people to make more. I'm a big believer in that. I constantly try to find ways for my barbers to make more. And this is something, honestly, I'm still working on, but I have to be okay with the fact that not all of my barbers are going to make $100,000 a year. Like, they can, but it's going to be hard. And most of them are probably not going to do it, right? That's because of the way we're structured, right? And a lot of them are probably going to be okay with that. And if they aren't, then they can leave, right? But they choose to stay because of the other things that we offer, right? Because culture is really important. Benefits are important, right? Work-life balance is important to people. We have a 4-day work week and the schedule doesn't change. That's really important to some people, right? So you don't have to, as a barbershop owner, strictly just compete on pay. It's like there's only so much you can pay people, and then before they reach a limit, right? So the only way they can make more is to produce more. So you give them other responsibilities maybe, or create new services or whatever, so that, because again, where's the money going to come from? So this is the last thing I want to show you guys, because this is how you can answer that question of, well, I want to pay more than whatever. How do I do that? Well, you have to create other sources of revenue. So this is why I think, I'll just put mystery source here. So this is why I think some people have figured out how to pay more than 40, 50, or whatever percent commission, is because, let's change this number back to 50%. So now we're losing money again, right? Because if you can figure out a way to create other revenue that has nothing to do with providing services, then that will lower your payroll cost, right? So this is why some people sell coaching programs, why some people go so hard on content and sell ebooks. At least, that's what inspired me, right? I'm motivated by just being able to give my team more. So I started making content, YouTube, this video you're watching, having my Skool group, so that I can create more revenue in the business, which is going to drive this number down, right? So my goal is to be able to pay more than anybody else while still having employees and while still having benefits. I want to get to the point where it just makes no reason to leave, like ever. Like, you would not make more going out on your own. You would not make more going independent. You would not make more being a barbershop owner. So you have to create another source of revenue, which is going to drive this number down, right? So let's say I found a way to make an extra 10 grand a month completely outside of the barbershop that has nothing to do with providing services. And if I did that, look what happens to my payroll cost. It goes down, right? So I went down, and now I have profit again. See? So it's simply just math at the end of the day. And if you want to be able to pay your people really, really well, fine. That's fine. You know, just figure out where is the money going to come from, because your business needs a paycheck too. You deserve a paycheck as a barbershop owner. And this is how you figure out the math on how to do that. So I'm sorry it wasn't such a simple answer of you should pay your people this much or this much, because I think it's irresponsible for somebody to go on the internet and tell somebody, another barbershop owner, this is how much commission you should pay your barbers. Because how can they know that without sitting down and doing the math for your business to see what your business can afford? They can't. So by them telling you that, that tells me that they probably guessed, right? So go back and watch this video, save it, rewatch it a few times, do the math, and let me know if this helps you. But hopefully this answers the question of how much commission to pay your barbers, because this is easily one of those things that can put you out of business if you get this wrong. And if you need help, I have a barbershop owner mastermind where I can help you walk through this process. So hopefully you guys found that helpful. I'll see you in the next one.